Today, we are taking a bit of a deep dive into Catholic theology in order to address how it attempts to merge evolution and theology, but fails. I do appreciate the effort, though. If one is going to be a believer, at least be one that accepts evolution, like Father Dominic here.
Where does intelligent life come from? Does intelligent animal life, that is, human life, simply emerge or evolve from lower forms of life?
But I would suggest not thinking about it too much, because when you do, it all unravels. Let's have a chat. Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me, and especially to my patrons and channel members. Welcome to new members this month, Caleb Umek, Papa Long, and D.H. Lewis. Thank you for your support. Today, we are looking at a video from the Thomistic Institute on evolution and the creation of man. And while I'm happy that at least this video is not from a young earther and does not try to deny reality the way young earthers do, the attempt to knit together the reality of nature and the theology of people who lived long before our current understanding of nature existed just doesn't work. Let's see how Father Dominic tries.
When we look at the world around us, we can observe a gradation among things. Plants absorb nutrients, spread out their leaves toward the sun, they grow and reproduce. Animals are, in a sense, more alive than plants. They have powers of sensation.
I was going to nitpick whether animals can be more alive than plants. But when you look at the second definition of alive, he's actually right. I don't think this definition really fits in this context, but close enough.
And movement. And not only those, it's easy to see in dogs, for example, that they have a memory. We can train them through repeated action and reinforcement.
The chickens have memory and can be trained as well. Not as easily as dogs, but they have this characteristic.
Come on, jump! Jump!
Even slime mold can be taught to run a maze. This trait isn't limited to but a few species.
They have emotions, too. They even seem to be quite perceptive of our emotions, which makes them wonderfully empathetic companions. But we find something even higher among human animals. We are specifically rational animals, Homo sapiens. Where does this higher intelligence come from?
Are we exclusively rational? Rational is defined as based on or in accordance with reason or logic, based on clear thought and reason. Does the human exhibit a trait not seen at all in the animals, or a trait that is sharper, more evolved, more defined? I would argue the latter, as the dog is just as capable of making a reasoned decision to act in a way that he knows will please his human in order to get the love and affection that he craves, just as the human does. The human is just better able to communicate the thought process.
In a previous video, we talked about the emergence of life in general. According to Aquinas, it would be possible for God to create the world in such a way that living things might emerge from non-living things. To be clear, for Aquinas, it would not quite be right to say that primordial life spontaneously emerged from lower things, as if lower things, absolutely of themselves, could give rise to higher forms. Life has its ultimate origin in a higher cause, in God, the first cause of all. Still, it's consistent with Aquinas' thought to theorize that God might have sown this hidden form of life in his creation from the beginning, like a seed that takes a very long time to germinate. Perhaps
my first thought when I heard this was to wonder how Aquinas, who lived in the 13th century, could possibly have any understanding of speciation, an idea that wouldn't evolve until the 19th century. Here's the source paper for the video, and Father Dominic is right. I have to give Aquinas credit for recognizing the possibility of new species. His understanding was limited to crossbreeding, with the example of a mule from a horse and a donkey. Thus, it is understandable that he would call this a rare thing. Not understanding that speciation was going on all around him all the time, he just couldn't see it because most of it occurs too slowly for any particular individual to observe it. And when it does happen rapidly, it is usually on a level that Aquinas didn't have the tools needed to observe it, like with mutating viruses. I was curious about the omitted portion of this paragraph. Here it is. New species are produced by the putrefaction by the power which the stars and elements received at the beginning. And again, while I don't expect Aquinas to be a source for how a yet-to-be-discovered process actually works, if he is in fact your source for how these ideas can work together, but omitting the portion within the same paragraph that clearly is nonsense doesn't bode well for your ability to arrive at a logical conclusion based on sound reason.
Perhaps the entire cosmos is a complex causal matrix that, considered as a whole, received this seed from God in the beginning. Then, at the right time, and through his providential governance of the world, that hidden potency could become actual through the complex interaction of secondary causes. On this account, single-celled organisms might emerge first, and then, after a long time, they might give rise to more complex organisms, eventually developing into the vast diversity we find in the plant and animal kingdoms. It could even be the case that this eventually led to the emergence of hominid animals.
This is clearly not what Aquinas thought, as he considered speciation to be a rare thing. But Father Dominic is not wrong either. I found nothing in the Summa Theologica that directly contradicts the idea that not all humans existed in their current form at creation, with the caveat that I didn't read even close to the whole thing. Aquinas leaves open the possibility that God created during the 6 days the essence of the creatures that he, Aquinas, had not yet seen, and that God would later put this essence into a physical form and thus create a new animal, new to earth, but not entirely new as the essence existed in heaven even before that creature was made on earth. We will get into more detail on this later.
In broad strokes, many contemporary scientists think our biological history looks something like this. It's important to pause here, however, because a hominid animal is not yet a rational animal.
I'd like to know how you came to this conclusion. Homo sapiens are hominid animals. So how can you make the claim that hominid animals are not rational? Are you saying that humans are not yet rational? That is an irrational claim, if you are right, but speak for yourself, buddy. On the whole, humans are a rational hominid species. At least sometimes.
The church is supposed to direct the government. The government is not supposed to direct the church.
Because a hominid animal is not yet a rational animal, even if he's one of our biological ancestors.
Except hominid animals are not our biological ancestors. We are hominid animals. They are us.
What's the difference? Human beings are rational animals. Our rationality makes us intelligent. We're able not only to perceive or to respond to stimuli or even to remember, but we're able to understand.
Even if we grant your claim that humans are not hominid animals, that somehow there is a distinction, where do you draw the line? Which hominids do you say are rational and able to understand? Homo sapiens coexisted with and even mated with Denisovans and Neanderthals. On what basis did you determine that the Homo sapiens to be more rational and understanding than the Denisovans and Neanderthals? What exactly do we understand and rationalize that the other groups did not? If you are going to make rational thinking and understanding the demarcation of what you accept as human, then you need to be able to show how Homo sapiens are different. I would agree that we are more rational and understanding, but it is a matter of degree, not a distinguishing characteristic. You are looking at modern Homo sapiens who have the advantage of information accumulated and passed down to us by millions of years of ancestors. If we look back at the level of rational thought of Homo sapiens at the dawn of their existence, before they had the benefit of developing information technology, they would look very much like their immediate ancestors. Because they evolved from and lived with their predecessors before migrating and becoming a distinct people group, it is unlikely that even a modern human could measure a difference in their reasoning abilities. For example, at one time it was thought that only Homo sapiens were capable of making and using fire, but studies show that Neanderthals had a level of understanding of this as well. At one time, language was thought to be the demarcation line, but Denisovans and Neanderthals also had verbal languages. Answers in Genesis recognizes this and classifies Denisovans and Neanderthals as other humans. To make them fit into their biblical narrative, they have Denisovans and Neanderthals evolving from, they would say descending from, Homo sapiens. It would appear that Father Dominic has them in the correct order, but I can't tell whether or not he considers them to be human, as he never says where that line is that distinguishes humans from other animals. He makes the claim that the distinction is clear, but then he never indicates where that clear line is. If he does include Denisovans and Neanderthals as human, where does he draw the line? How about Homo heidelbergensis? This is where William Lane Craig draws the line. Or how about Homo erectus or Homo habilis? The issue is that there is no clear demarcation.
Understanding something means grasping more profoundly what it is. Classically, it means the ability to abstract from matter. Now, a dog may know this tree and that person, but only a mind endowed with a higher intellectual power, the light of natural reason, can abstract from these particular things and come to an understanding of what a tree and a person are in general. What is their essence or nature?
First, did you notice how Father Dominic slipped in his theology?
But only a mind endowed with a higher intellectual power.
Now the human mind is endowed with a higher intellectual power, implying that this power came from a source other than nature. As to his comparison, he implies that the ability to classify and group things is evidence of this level of understanding, except animals are capable of doing just that. In this study, pigeons were trained to respond to a number of different stimuli and were able not only to classify the objects that they were trained with, but they were also able to transfer this understanding to new objects that they were introduced to. Clearly, pigeons also have this level of understanding, and pigeons are not particularly intelligent animals. Dogs, dolphins, octopi, and crows are more intelligent than pigeons. So why does Father Dominic think this ability is limited to humans? I would surmise two things. One, he didn't look for information to confirm his claim. He likely made this assumption based on his inability to communicate well enough with animals to determine what they are thinking. Second, and more importantly, he needs this to be true to make his theology work. In order to make humans a special creation of God and somehow different from the rest of what has evolved naturally, he needs humans to have some kind of quality to show that they are in fact different. But sadly for the Father here, they are not. Side note, I found this argument while searching for the support for the video to find the basis for the Father's claims. Unfortunately, Father Dominic only gives a 2-page paper as the source of his material, which in turn referred me to the Summa Theologica. Not understanding how the references to the Theologica work, I spent a few hours going through the Summa Theologica, looking for the exact context for some of the short paper. In doing so, I fell on this gem of illogic as a response to the question, whether the creation of things was in the beginning of time. Even time itself is created, but time cannot be created in the beginning of time, since time is divisible and the beginning of time is indivisible. Therefore, the creation of things was not in the beginning of time. Except, if time was created, then there must have been a time before time, a moment in time when God created time, which is incoherent. Second, even if Aquinas is right and time has a beginning, how does it follow that things were not created simultaneously? I don't see the connection. Another interesting note, evidently there is more than one heaven. Aquinas says, among the heavenly bodies exists a body partly transparent and partly luminous, which we call the sidereal heaven. There also exists a heaven wholly transparent, called by some the aqueous or crystalline heaven. If then there exists a still higher heaven, it must be wholly luminous. But this cannot be, for then the air would be constantly illuminated, and there would be no night. Therefore, the empyrean heaven was not created together with formless matter. Back to Father Dominic.
What makes them flourish? How to act in order to respect and honor their natures, and so to behave justly towards them. Where does this intelligence come from?
Except animals do also exhibit these behaviors as well. A mother bear will teach her cubs to behave. A wolf pack or chimpanzee community have rules of acceptable behavior, and members that violate these rules get ostracized from the community. Again, these are not exclusive to humans.
Unlike plant or animal life, human acts of understanding and intelligence transcend matter. They belong to the realm of the spirit, to what is immaterial. In fact, mere animals are not able to understand the essence of a tree, a dog, or a human being. A dog doesn't reflect on what his life means and how he should live it. These kinds of things transcend what is possible for a mere animal.
How do you know this, Father Dominic? Have you ever asked a dog this question? Have you ever found a meaningful way to communicate with a dog in order to make this determination? Or do you just presume this because it fits your theology better?
St. Thomas Aquinas explains that a rational creature is endowed by God with a special light of the mind, which he calls the light of natural reason. This is a power of the spiritual soul, which is immaterial. A spiritual soul cannot simply arise from matter, from below, because it has a share in God's own light, which comes from above. The light of reason is what allows man to transcend the limits of the material world and to begin to know and to love in the fullest and proper senses of those words.
And how did Aquinas come to this conclusion? Let's look at Father Dominic's source paper. Reflecting on the capacities of the human soul, Aristotle and St. Thomas Aquinas concluded that our soul, unlike the rose soul or the kangaroo soul, is immaterial. Whereas rose and kangaroo souls are coextensive with matter, the human soul has to exceed matter because it is able to do things that exceed the capacities of matter. Specifically, Aristotle and Aquinas argued that the human soul is immaterial because it is able to grasp and process abstract ideas, like truth or justice or beauty, that do not have length, width, or height. To put it another way, the human soul is immaterial because it has the capacity to grasp the complex and abstract ideas. And of course, the problem with this argument is that neither Aristotle nor Aquinas had the benefit of understanding how complex human evolution is. They had no idea the existence of early hominids, and that these early hominids did in fact have at least some of these characteristics. And where to draw the line between humans and other animals is now far too blurry for anyone to make these kinds of claims today. According to St. Thomas Aquinas, the effect of divine providence is not only that things should happen somehow, but that they should happen either by necessity or by contingency. Therefore, whatsoever divine providence ordains happens infallibly and of necessity happens infallibly, and that happens from contingency, which the divine providence conceives to happen from contingency. And Father Dominic accepts this as fact, even though Aquinas gives us no reason, no example, no evidence on which he bases this conclusion. It isn't the Bible. This is just Aquinas' thoughts on the matter. It's, for Aquinas tells me so. Don't get me wrong, Aquinas was an intelligent, educated, and logical thinker. He was astoundingly brilliant for his day. But I have to wonder if he was given the data that we have today about how differentiation between humans and other primates, If he was given the genetic information that proves that humans are in fact direct descendants from other primates, would he come to the same conclusion? I think not. He might find another way to make his theology work, or he might find a whole new theology. But either way, it's impossible to conclude today that a human soul arises from an immaterial source and an animal soul arises from a material source when the support for that conclusion comes from a person who didn't have the data proving that humans are direct descendants of other animals.
Knowing, understanding, willing, loving, these are spiritual acts of a rational being, one that has an immaterial dimension.
Except we know that animals also exhibit these qualities. Animals express love, understanding, and knowing. And anyone who questions the will of an animal to accomplish these things need only Google a few dog stories and movies. And yes, this is Wikipedia, but it isn't a unique story. It's just famous for how far the dog traveled. There are plenty of these out there. Humans are not unique, at least not in these respects.
It's true that our brains are material bodily organs, and that our mental activity depends on having a healthy body and a healthy brain. But our understanding cannot simply be explained by or reduced to our brains, because understanding is more than a material process.
Says the man who asserts this with no evidence. But if the soul is more than just the brain, a brain injury should not change the soul. It should not change the essence of who a person is, and yet it does. Studies show that traumatic brain injury can and does change personality. If the soul is more than the brain, why is this so?
This is why the Catholic faith holds that even if bodily and animal life emerged and developed through a long process of evolution, God intervened in history and did something new to bring about a new kind of creature, which we call the human being, a higher animal than had ever existed before, endowed with a spiritual and therefore a rational soul.
Yes, this would be nice. It feels good to be special. It feels good to think that we are special and a divine being made us special. Unfortunately, there is no logical reason to believe this to be true. Hate to burst your bubble, Father, but we are just another member of the gang.
We see this in the creation accounts in Scripture. In earlier videos, we've discussed how to read those biblical passages.
Really? People can't just read it for themselves? Are you saying the word of a perfect God is so imperfect that one needs a priest just to tell them how to read it?
They're not scientific or historical narratives.
Good. Glad we got that out of the way. Genesis is not historical. So why do you think it is a real event if it is not a historical narrative? I do have to wonder what he thinks it is. Allegory? Metaphor? Illustration? If it isn't historical, why does he think it actually happened literally?
Genesis is revealing to us a fundamental theological truth about the creation of the human being, even though it doesn't tell us in scientific or historical terms precisely what that special creation looked like. But we can be sure that it involved God directly infusing a new and higher principle of life, an immaterial soul, as the form of a new and higher creature's body.
Why? Why can you be sure of this? Because the church told you to think this? When you have already acknowledged that you have no scientific or historical reason to think that this is what happened, on what basis do you assert that it is so?
By the way, it's hard to be sure, but we might suppose that the first human being's body was also different from the bodies of any previous animal, since the soul is the form of the body.
This one is a new one on me. If the soul is the form of the body, but altering the body also alters the soul, how does that work? His source paper is written by Nicaro Austriaco, American molecular biologist, who says, importantly, only matter can evolve because it is immaterial. The human soul has to be created immediately by God. It cannot evolve. So Father Austriaco is either unaware or has ignored the evidence that personality is altered by brain injury. He concludes, God, who alone creates, worked through evolution in preparing the matter of the bodies of the first humans. So matter evolves, but God infuses a soul into the matter. Souls, according to Aquinas, were made by God in the 6 days of creation and exist in heaven in an immaterial form until God puts them into a material body. It's interesting to note that Aquinas' position is that God made all he intended to create in an initial creation, and that God used those things later by transforming them into material existence. For example, he claims that God made Adam's rib in initial creation, knowing he would use it to form Eve later. But this makes no sense. If it was inside of Adam and God had to put Adam to sleep to extract it, it had to already be in a material form. And again, I'm not knocking Aquinas. He was brilliant for his day. Rather, this is the problem with all God claims. As soon as you try to put details on them, when you flesh them out from the vague stories of the Bible to full theologies, they fall apart. The only way to make them make sense is to ignore the parts of reality that don't fit your theology, just as Father Dominic is doing here.
If we assume that the contemporary scientific accounts of biological evolution are correct, we might hypothesize that after a long period of evolution culminating in a non-rational hominid animal, a new kind of being came into existence by God's direct action of infusing a spiritual soul.
And this is the essence of the problem. This is why the believer can see man as a special creation when the full evolutionary picture would tell you otherwise. Evolution is not linear, as Father Dominic tries to make it with this illustration. A pair of chimpanzees did not one day give birth to a pair of Australopithecus afarensis. Rather, evolution occurs within a much larger population. A gene change occurs. The gene is passed down. If the gene is passed down enough, it becomes fixated in the species. Through this process, small changes occur, which eventually lead to speciation. But this does not occur in a single progenitor pair. It occurs within a population. Thus, it is not possible to distinguish at what point humans began to exist as humans. We can point to the earliest known Homo sapien specimen, but we cannot say that this or any other fossil was the very first human, because there isn't really a first human. The earliest Homo sapiens evolved in sub-Saharan Africa about 200,000 years ago, among a population of other hominids. Thus, the idea of a special creation of humans by God at some point in history cannot be fused with a full understanding of evolution. There is one theory that does work better than this one. It's a theory of Dr. Joshua Swamidass, who says that God might have done a special creation in a small place called Eden, alongside of the humans that evolved naturally. This pair then intermingled with the evolved humans when they were kicked out of the garden, and thus we have the DNA of the evolved humans in our lineage, and the image of God that was given specially to Adam and Eve. He says that the other lines died out so that all modern humans are descended from this single pair, giving all modern humans the God image and the human soul that was passed down through Adam and Eve, even though we are also descended from other animals as well. This view is more reasonable and is better at recognizing the evolutionary process. Father Dominic would not be able to accept this view, however, because it has some humans as not having human souls and not being a part of God's special creation. It also does not find humans to be distinct from other animals.
So that from a non-rational biological ancestor, something radically new came to be. This would transcend what any process of evolution could itself bring about: the creation of a rational animal, the first human being.
And Dr. Swamidass would tell you that this is not a full understanding of evolution. He would say that it is possible to take a literal view of Genesis and a Christian theology and hold to both without cognitive dissonance. but that this view of evolution is incomplete and fails to account for all the irrefutable evidence of prior animal ancestry in our DNA.
In short, in order to have intelligent life, there must be a spiritual soul endowed with the light of reason.
So were the pre-Homo sapien hominids lacking in reason?
Since it's an immaterial principle, the human soul cannot simply emerge from below, from matter.
Now the soul is a principle. It has no experience as matter. It's just an idea. Since it is evidenced by that ability to reason, would you say that humans that apparently lack the ability to reason, like this pair,
I don't really know what happened on January 6th.
January 6th,
The election day?
no, election day was back in November. Did you hear about the insurrection attempt at the Capitol?
No.
What's your response there?
I think it's true.
You think Bill Barr is right?
Yeah.
Because he's talking about the fact that the election was stolen is bullshit.
Yeah, for sure.
So he says it wasn't stolen.
Oh.
No.
Oh,
Yeah,
no.
it was stolen.
You
do they lack souls? I see humans becoming less reasonable. Does that mean our souls are getting weaker? Is God running out of souls to infuse into people, and the ones he has left aren't very good?
It must be created directly by God. In fact, it's the teaching of the Catholic Church that God does this at every human conception.
Infuses a soul or creates a soul? Aquinas would say God is done creating. The souls are all sitting in heaven waiting to be infused into a body. Why not just infuse them into bodies that are already in heaven? Why did God even bother making Earth? This seems like a big waste of time and energy. Since it didn't turn out right, and the people here don't do what he wants or believe what he wants them to believe, it seems like just making people already in heaven would be what a reasonable and rational person would do. Incidentally, this is why the Catholic Church is adamant about baptizing babies. Since babies are born condemned by having original sin in them, in addition to the immortal soul that God gives them, they are also doomed to hell if they don't get sprinkled with the magic water that washes away that original sin.
The father and mother contribute the biological foundation for a new human life, but not the soul.
Yep, your human parents provide you the part that damns you to hell, but not your soul, which makes you immortal. And since God infuses that immortal soul into a sinful body, then the priest has to save that soul by sprinkling the sinful body with the magic water. I'm wondering why an omniscient God would come up with such a poor plan. Why is the God-made soul so fragile that when it is infused into a material body, it becomes sinful? Why not just make the soul immune to sin? This theology just makes no sense.
That is created directly by God at the moment of conception.
I was not expecting this. This is in direct conflict with Aquinas' Theological. I guess "for Aquinas tells me so" isn't always right.
Our biological life may trace its ancestry back to the earliest organisms on Earth, but we are not like any other animals. God has given us a divine spark from above and a destiny that points us beyond the limits of this world, one that can only find its fulfillment in God Himself.
And this directly contradicts your point that humans are a special creation. This last point seems to agree with Dr. Swamidass, that humans have DNA from other animals, and that they are a fusion of natural and special creation. Pick a lane. Are humans a fusion of animal DNA with a human soul, or are they a special creation completely separate from the rest of the animal kingdom? I think the real message here is that people are special, and I will agree with this point. We don't need a God to be special. We don't need a God to give us purpose or dignity or destiny. We can find it on our own. And it's much easier to do this as an unbeliever than as a believer. Believers need to seek a God that never responds to them to find out what that God wants or thinks. For the unbeliever, life is what you make of it. You are special because all people are special. You have a purpose and a destiny, and you don't need anyone to approve what that is. You just need to find it for yourself and live your life.